On the night of May 10th, 1941, a Scottish farmer named David McLean found a German Messerschmitt airplane ablaze in his field and a parachutist who identified himself as Captain Alfred Horn. McLean's mother served the stranger tea by the cottage fireside, completely unaware that she was entertaining one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. The parachutist wasn't Captain Horn. He was Rudolf Hess, Adolf Hitler's deputy and the third-ranking member of the Nazi Party. He had stood with Hitler at the beer hall putsch, served with him in Landsberg prison, and took dictation for much of Mein Kampf. He was second only to Hermann Göring in the Nazi succession hierarchy, and now in the middle of World War II with Nazi Germany at the height of its power, controlling most of continental Europe, Hess had stolen a plane, flown solo across 900 miles of hostile territory, and crash-landed in Scotland on what he called a peace mission. His appearance on Scottish soil just weeks before Hitler would launch his ill-fated invasion of the Soviet Union was one of the war's most bizarre episodes. It created an international sensation. Churchill was baffled, Hitler was enraged, Stalin was suspicious, and for over 80 years historians have been asking, why did Rudolf Hess fly to Scotland? Was he insane? Was he acting on Hitler's orders? Was he lured there by British intelligence? Or was it all a desperate, idealistic gamble by a man who thought he could single-handedly stop the war? Today, we're diving deep into one of World War II's strangest and most enduring mysteries. To understand why Hess's flight was so shocking, you need to understand who he was. Rudolf Walter. Richard Hess was born on April 26, 1894, in Alexandria, Egypt, to a wealthy German merchant family. When World War I broke out, Hess enlisted as an infantryman. He was wounded twice, earned the Iron Cross second class, and by war's end was training as an aviator. In 32 years after the war, Hess studied at the University of Munich, where he became fascinated by nationalist ideas. In 1920, he heard a struggling politician named Adolf Hitler give a passionate speech at a beer hall. Hess was transfixed. He joined the Nazi Party immediately, becoming member number 16. In November 1923, Hess participated in the beer hall putsch, Hitler's failed attempt to overthrow the Bavarian government. When it collapsed, Hess fled to Austria, but he voluntarily returned to share Hitler's imprisonment at Landsberg. For hours each day, Hitler paced the cell dictating his political manifesto while Hess typed. The result was Mein Kampf. This created an extraordinarily close bond. Hitler trusted Hess completely. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, Hitler appointed Hess as deputy Führer. Hess had enormous power. He could approve or reject all Nazi Party appointments. He signed off on all legislation. Every Nazi official began their correspondence with Heil Hitler and ended with a copy to Hess. But by the late 1930s, Hess's power was waning as Hitler became consumed with military strategy. Men like Hermann Göring, Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler, and Martin Bormann began eclipsing Hess. He was still important in name, but increasingly sidelined from crucial decisions. Many in Hitler's inner circle thought Hess was eccentric, even unstable. He was obsessed with natural medicine, astrology, and mysticism. He believed in bizarre alternative health treatments. He was quiet and withdrawn, where other Nazi leaders were boisterous and aggressive. Albert Speer later wrote that Hess had something of the unworldly about him. He was, in Speer's words, half genius, half crank. By 1941, Rudolf Hess was a man desperate to prove his relevance, and he believed he had found a way. After a final check of the weather reports for Germany and the North Sea, Hess took off at 17:45 on 10th May 1941 from the airfield at Augsburg-Hounstetten in his specially prepared aircraft. Hess displayed considerable skill by navigating such a course alone, using only charts and maps on a foggy, dark night over largely unfamiliar terrain, all while avoiding being shot down by British air defenses. Hess had been planning this for months. Since October 1940, he had been secretly training on the Messerschmitt Bf 110, a twin-engine fighter bomber. He logged multiple cross-country flights. He requested specific modifications, a radio compass, changes to the oxygen system, and large long-range fuel tanks. A particular aircraft registration number VJ-POQ was held in reserve exclusively for his use. The Bf-110 wasn't easy to fly solo. It was a two-seater aircraft designed for a pilot and navigator. Hess would have to handle all navigation, fuel management, and flying duties himself at night over enemy territory, but Hess was determined. He later claimed it was the indiscriminate bombing of thousands of helpless women and children, both in Germany and in England, that had motivated his flight. The flight plan was audacious. He flew up the Rhine River, crossed the North Sea at low altitude to avoid radar, and approached the British coast near the Farne Islands around 10 p.m. He had been tracked by the Royal Observer Corps since 20 hours. British radar had detected an unidentified aircraft. Fighter Command scrambled Spitfires to intercept, but Hess was flying at extremely low altitude, hugging the ground, making him difficult to target. The Spitfires couldn't find him in the darkness. Hess navigated by following railway lines and rivers, comparing what he saw below with his maps. His destination was Dungivel House, home of the Duke of Hamilton, about 12 miles south of Glasgow. But in the darkness, Hess overshot his target. He circled back, desperately trying to locate Dungivel in the blackness below. His fuel was critically low. He had been flying for over 5 hours. Around 11 p.m., with his tanks nearly empty, Hess made his decision. He would have to bail out. He injured his foot either while exiting the aircraft or when he hit the ground. His parachute drifted down toward Floor's farm, near the village of Eaglesham. The aircraft crashed at 2309, about 12 miles west of Dungivel House. David McLean, the farmer who found him struggling with his parachute harness, helped the injured German to his cottage. Hess initially claimed to be Hauptmann Alfred Horn, a Luftwaffe officer. He said he had an important message for the Duke of Hamilton. The local home guard was summoned. Hess was taken to a nearby military barracks, then to Maryhill Barracks in Glasgow. Throughout the night, he insisted he needed to speak to the Duke of Hamilton. Finally, he revealed his true identity. The Duke of Hamilton, who was serving as an RAF wing commander, was summoned. When he arrived and saw the prisoner, he was stunned. He had met Rudolf Hess once before, briefly, at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. This was definitely him. News of Hess's arrival reached Churchill at his country estate. The Prime Minister was watching a Marx Brothers film when he was interrupted with the news. His response has become legendary. After being told that Hitler's deputy had landed in Scotland, Churchill is said to have replied, "Hess? Well, Hess. He is in jail, isn't he?" Then he went back to watching the movie. But beneath Churchill's affected nonchalance, British intelligence was working frantically to understand what had just happened. Before his departure from Germany, Hess had given his adjutant, Karl-Heinz Pinch, a letter addressed to Hitler that detailed his plans to initiate peace negotiations with the UK. Pinch waited until noon the following day, May 11th, before traveling to Hitler's Berghof retreat in Bavaria to deliver the letter. According to accounts, Hitler read it in stunned silence. What happened next depends on who you ask. Inner Circle. Nazi Albert Speer, waiting outside Hitler's office during the meeting, described the Nazi leader's reaction as an inarticulate, almost animal outcry of rage. What bothered him was that Churchill might use the incident to pretend to Germany's allies that Hitler was extending a peace feeler. Who will believe me when I say that Hess did not fly there in my name, that the whole thing is not some sort of intrigue behind the backs of my allies? But there's another version. Hess's adjutant, Pinch, after spending years as a Soviet prisoner, later gave a different account. He claimed Hitler was not surprised at all that the mission had been discussed beforehand, but historians note that Pinch's statement was likely coerced by Soviet interrogators and should be treated with skepticism. What we know for certain is that Hitler moved quickly to distance himself from Hess's actions. At 8 p.m. on May 11th, a radio broadcast from Germany gave the first official explanation. The broadcast said, party member Hess had left on Saturday on a flight from which he had not yet returned. The government further said that Hess had suffered a mental disturbance and had left a letter that, unfortunately, justifies the fear that he was a victim of mental hallucinations. The broadcast also said that a number of Hess's Confederates had been arrested. The Nazi propaganda machine went into overdrive. Goebbels spread the story that Hess had been manipulated by mystics, astrologers, and nature healers. He was portrayed as mentally ill, a deranged dreamer who had acted without authorization. Hitler stripped Hess of all positions and titles. He ordered that Hess be shot if he ever returned to Germany. Martin Bormann, Hess's longtime rival, was appointed to replace him as head of the Nazi Party Chancellery. Within days, Hess's name was being erased from German public life. His portraits were removed from buildings. References to him were deleted from Nazi publications. It was as if he had never existed. But the question remained, had Hess acted alone, or did Hitler know? What exactly was Hess proposing? Through his advisor, Albrecht Haushofer, Hess had been putting out feelers to British contacts since September 1940. Haushofer had sent a letter to the Duke of Hamilton on September 23, 1940, which invited him to meet in Lisbon. The letter was intercepted by intelligence services and was not shown to Hamilton until February 1941. Hess believed that the Duke of Hamilton was a member of a peace party in Britain, a group of influential people who opposed Churchill's determination to fight to the end. Hess was catastrophically wrong about this. Hamilton had been involved with the Anglo-German Fellowship in the interwar years, an organization promoting British-German friendship. But by 1941, after Hitler's invasions, betrayals, and the Blitz, virtually no one in Britain wanted peace on Nazi terms. Hess's proposal was straightforward and completely delusional. Germany would guarantee the British Empire's integrity. In return, Britain would give Germany a free hand in Europe. Britain would agree not to interfere with Nazi domination of continental Europe, including the planned invasion of the Soviet Union. Hess genuinely believed this was reasonable. He thought Britain's continued resistance was irrational. Germany had already conquered most of Europe. The Luftwaffe had failed to break Britain in the Battle of Britain, but invasion seemed impossible. Why continue fighting? Hess wrote that his flight to Scotland was intended to initiate the fastest way to win the war. He believed that with the Soviet Union about to be invaded, it made no sense for Germany to fight a two-front war. But Hess fundamentally misunderstood Britain's position. By May 1941, it was far too late for credible peace talks. Churchill's government had no intention of negotiating. The United States was moving toward entering the war. Britain was determined to fight until Nazi Germany was completely defeated. When Hess met with British officials, including Yvonne Kirkpatrick, the Foreign Office's Germany expert, they listened politely but offered no hope. Hess was treated as a prisoner of war. His peace proposal was rejected without serious consideration. Churchill saw propaganda value in the story, but was careful not to give the impression that Britain was negotiating. He wanted to avoid alarming the Soviet Union or creating false hopes of peace among war-weary British citizens. Hess would have found it incredible that he, Hitler's deputy who claimed to know Hitler's mind, should have caused so little a stir with the British government, and that his peace plans would have been totally disregarded. His grand gesture had accomplished nothing. Hess's flight immediately spawned conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Theory 1. Hitler knew and approved the article in the American Mercury in 1943, authored by Anonymous, stated that Hess came to Scotland not only with Adolf Hitler's blessing, but upon Hitler's explicit orders. Far from being a surprise, the arrival of Hess was expected by a limited number of Britishers. The outlines of his mission were known in advance, and the Nazi leader actually had a Royal Air Force escort in the final stage of his air journey. This theory suggests that Hitler wanted to secure peace with Britain before invading the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, began just 6 weeks after Hess's flight on June 22, 1941. The timing seems too coincidental, but there are problems with this theory. If Hitler had approved, why did he react with such fury? Why publicly declare Hess insane? And if it was an official mission, why send Hess alone in a dangerous solo flight when a proper diplomatic delegation could have been arranged? Theory 2. British intelligence lured him. Some theorists believe British intelligence knew Hess was coming and deliberately lured him to Scotland as part of an elaborate deception operation. The evidence cited includes the fact that public records show that 3 Spitfires and a Defiant were ordered to attack, not escort, the approaching enemy aircraft. However, it has been argued that Hess's flight was expected, and that was the reason that his plane was not attacked. If the RAF had been ordered to allow Hess's aircraft to pass unhindered, it would have been necessary to advise Fighter Command's headquarters as well as every area and sector controller, who in turn would have passed on the orders to their staff and the various RAF squadrons and stations. Surely, it would have been virtually impossible to maintain secrecy at this scale at the time and for so many years afterwards. the absence of documentation, the failure to shoot him down despite radar detection, and Churchill's careful handling of the publicity all suggest to some that British intelligence was running an operation, but no credible evidence has ever emerged to support this. Theory 3. It was a doppelganger. One of the most bizarre conspiracy theories claims that the man who flew to Scotland wasn't actually Rudolf Hess at all, but a double, an imposter created by either British or German intelligence. This theory was promoted by Dr. Hugh Thomas, a physician who examined the Spandau prisoner in the 1970s. Thomas claimed that the prisoner lacked scars that the real Hess should have had from World War I injuries. This theory persisted for decades until 2019, when forensic DNA analysis of a blood sample from prisoner Spandau No. 7 was compared with DNA from a male Hess relative. The result was a 99.99% match, definitively proving the prisoner was Rudolf Hess. Theory 4. He was insane. The simplest explanation is that Hess had experienced some form of mental breakdown. His belief that he could single-handedly broker peace between two nations at war was delusional. His conviction that British aristocrats would welcome his proposals and overthrow Churchill was detached from reality. British intelligence, backed up by medical opinion, had come to much the same conclusion, that Hess was mentally ill. During his captivity, Hess showed signs of paranoia, depression, and persecution mania. He attempted suicide multiple times. But was he insane when he flew to Scotland? Or did his mental health deteriorate during 46 years of imprisonment? Hess spent the rest of World War II as a British prisoner. He was held in various secure locations, interrogated repeatedly, and observed by psychiatrists. In 1945, he was returned to Germany to stand trial at Nuremberg. During much of the trial, Hess claimed amnesia, refusing to recognize former colleagues or acknowledge his role in Nazi crimes. Later, he admitted this had been a theatrical performance. The Nuremberg tribunal convicted him on 2 counts: crimes against peace and conspiracy with other German leaders to commit crimes. He was found not guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, since he had been in British custody during the period when most Holocaust atrocities were committed. Hess was sentenced to life imprisonment. Along with 6 other convicted Nazis, he was sent to Spandau prison in West Berlin. Spandau was unique. Built to hold 600 prisoners, it was jointly controlled by the 4 occupying powers, the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Each nation rotated control monthly. One by one, Hess's fellow prisoners were released, some due to ill health, others after serving their sentences. By 1966, Rudolf Hess was the sole remaining prisoner. He remained Spandau's only inhabitant for more than 2 decades. Maintaining Spandau for one elderly prisoner became increasingly absurd and expensive. The cost exceeded $1 million annually. The Western powers repeatedly proposed releasing Hess on humanitarian grounds, but the Soviet Union adamantly refused every request. As their late leader, Leonid Brezhnev, put it, to release Rudolf Hess would be an insult to the Soviet people. Some speculated that the Soviets wanted to maintain a 4-power presence in West Berlin, and Spandau prison provided that justification. Others suggested they feared Hess might reveal embarrassing information about pre-war Soviet-German relations. Hess settled into a numbing routine. He would wake at 6 a.m., exercise, walk exactly 215 paces in one direction and 215 paces back in the prison garden, read, and go to bed. Day after day, year after year, for over 4 decades. He wrote prolifically, filling notebooks with his thoughts. He corresponded with family. He maintained that the Third Reich had been a legitimate aspiration and believed he would someday play a role in a Fourth Reich. His loyalty to Hitler never wavered. Hess died on August 17, 1987, at the age of 93. He was found in a summer house that had been set up in the prison garden as a reading room. He had hanged himself using a length of electrical cord strung over a window latch, or had he? His lawyer, Alfred Seidel, released a statement claiming Hess had been too old and frail to tie a noose and hang himself. His medical orderly, Abdallah Malawi, who cared for Hess from 1982 to 1987, agreed, saying Hess was physically incapable of such an act. Hess's son, Wolf Rudiger. Hess claimed his father had been murdered by British intelligence to prevent him from revealing embarrassing secrets about British conduct during the war. But investigations by all 4 occupying powers concluded it was suicide. Lieutenant Cole Tony Letizier, the former British governor at Spandau prison, contradicted claims that Hess was too frail, noting that while Hess wore a truss and had difficulty bending to tie his shoelaces, he could write legibly and thus tie a knot. The most logical explanation is that Hess, an old man in pain who was disillusioned with the modern far right and who felt he had been left behind by history, chose to kill himself rather than wait to become a Nazi symbol of evil and death. Within weeks of Hess's death, Spandau prison was demolished to prevent it from becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. Today, a shopping center stands where the prison once was. Hess was initially buried at a secret location, but later reinterred in a family plot at Winston. The grave became a neo-Nazi pilgrimage site. In 2011, his remains were exhumed, cremated, and scattered at sea to prevent further demonstrations. Even in death, Rudolf Hess remained controversial. So what was Rudolf Hess's mission really about? Was it a sanctioned peace mission from Hitler? Almost certainly not. Hitler's rage and the immediate disavowal suggest genuine shock. Was it a British intelligence trap? Possible, but there's no solid evidence and it seems unnecessarily elaborate. Was Hess insane? Perhaps. His plan was certainly delusional, but was it insanity or just catastrophic misjudgment? The most likely explanation is this: Rudolf Hess was a true believer in Nazi ideology who was being eclipsed by more ruthless men. He genuinely believed that Britain and Germany should be allies, not enemies, and that Jewish communist and democratic forces were the real enemies of both nations. He thought that if he could just speak directly to the right people in Britain, he could make them see reason. He imagined himself as a peacemaker, a heroic figure who would end the war and restore his standing with Hitler. He told journalist Desmond Zwar that Germany could not win a war on two fronts. I knew that there was only one way out, and that was certainly not to fight against England. He was spectacularly, tragically wrong. Hess's flight changed nothing. The war continued for 4 more years. Millions more died. The Soviet Union became an enemy instead of a potential ally. And Hess himself spent 46 years in prison for his crimes against peace. What remains is the image of a man so convinced of his own importance and the righteousness of his cause that he stole a plane, flew 900 miles into enemy territory, and threw himself into the night sky above Scotland, believing he could change the course of history with the force of his convictions. He failed, but his strange journey to Scotland remains one of the most bizarre, fascinating, and mysterious episodes of World War II. Thank you for watching. If you found this deep dive into Rudolf Hess's Scotland mission fascinating, please subscribe for more World War II mysteries and let me know in the comments. Do you think Hess was acting on Hitler's orders, or was this the delusional act of a desperate man? I'd love to hear your theories. Until next time, remember, sometimes the strangest stories in history are the true ones.